A desperate bride, abandoned and chained to a tree, finds unexpected salvation in the hands of a wanted outlaw. But when her powerful enemies come hunting them both, will their fragile connection survive the brutal test of frontier justice? A gunshot cracked through the morning stillness, sending birds fleeing from treetops. Everett Blackwood ducked behind a fallen pine, his heart hammering against his ribs. Bounty hunters. Again. 3 months on the run had taught him to recognize the sound of men hunting for the $5,000 reward on his head. The Montana wilderness stretched before him, painted gold by the rising sun. Frost sparkled on pine needles like scattered diamonds. His stallion, Thunder, stomped nervously nearby, steam rising from his nostrils in the cold morning air. Everett ran a hand along the horse's neck, steadying them both. "Easy, boy," he whispered. "They'll pass us by." When silence returned to the forest, Everett checked his supplies. Food for 2 more days. 6 bullets in his revolver. The stolen money had run out weeks ago, leaving him with little to show for the risk that had branded him an outlaw. The Billings bank robbery hadn't been his idea. He'd been the lookout man, dragged into the scheme by his cousin. Now his cousin was dead, and Everett's face stared back from wanted posters in every town from here to the Dakota Territory. A crow cawed overhead, its black wings stark against the pale blue sky. Everett tugged his worn leather coat tighter around his shoulders and mounted Thunder. If he could reach the border, maybe Canada would offer a fresh start. The forest grew denser as he pressed north, the trees closing around him like protective hands. By midday, hunger gnawed at his belly. He dismounted near a small stream, letting Thunder drink while he chewed on jerky and stale bread. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in these woods. A human voice, crying. Everett froze, jerky halfway to his mouth. He tilted his head, listening. The sound came again. A woman's voice, calling weakly for help. Common sense told him to ride away. Fast. Could be a trap set by bounty hunters. But something in that voice, raw desperation, made him hesitate. "Fool," he muttered to himself. But he was already securing Thunder to a nearby branch. Everett moved silently through the trees, following the sound. His hand rested on his revolver, ready to draw at the first sign of trouble. The crying grew louder, punctuated by the clinking of metal. Pushing through a thicket of wild raspberries, he entered a small clearing. At its center stood a massive oak tree, its branches reaching toward the sky like gnarled fingers. Chained to its trunk was a woman. Everett blinked, sure his eyes were playing tricks. But when he looked again, she was still there, dressed in a once beautiful wedding gown, now torn and dirty. Dark hair fell in tangles around her shoulders. Her wrists, bound by iron shackles, were raw and bleeding where she had struggled against her bonds. For a moment he thought she was dead. Then her head lifted, and eyes the color of summer storms fixed on him with startling intensity. "Are you real?" she asked, voice cracking from thirst. "Or have I started seeing things?" Everett glanced around the clearing, searching for signs of an ambush. Finding none, he stepped forward cautiously. "I'm real enough," he said, keeping his voice low. "What happened to you?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "My wedding day went poorly." She tugged weakly at her chains. "As you can see." Everett approached slowly, scanning the ground around her. Bootprints, men's several pairs, led away from the tree toward the east. They looked fresh, maybe a day old. "Your husband did this?" he asked, finding it hard to believe even as he said it. "Would-be husband," she corrected, watching him with wary hope. "He and his brothers brought me here yesterday when they discovered I—" She stopped, pride momentarily overriding desperation. "That's not important now." The woman's face was dirty, streaked with tears, but Everett could see she was young, maybe 25. A small cut above her right eye had dried to a dark red line. "How long have you been here?" he asked, examining the chains. They were secured with a heavy padlock. "Since yesterday morning." Her lips were cracked from thirst. "They said the wolves would find me by nightfall, but I guess I wasn't tasty enough." Despite everything, Everett found himself almost smiling at her grim humor. He pulled his canteen from his belt and held it to her lips. She drank desperately, water spilling down her chin. "Thank you," she whispered when she finished. "I'm Catherine Mills." Everett nodded but didn't offer his name. Names were dangerous things for a wanted man. He studied the lock, then drew his knife from his boot. "Hold still," he instructed, working the blade into the keyhole. Minutes passed in tense silence as he manipulated the knife, feeling for the mechanism inside. Catherine watched him, hope and fear battling in her eyes. With a satisfying click, the lock sprung open. Catherine sagged forward as the chains loosened, nearly falling. Everett caught her by the shoulders, steadying her. "Can you walk?" he asked. Catherine nodded, though he didn't miss how she wobbled as she took her first step away from the tree. Her ankles were scratched and bare, shoes missing. "My camp's not far," Everett found himself saying. "We can get you food and rest before you head back to town." Catherine's face darkened. "I'm not going back to prosperity. Not ever." Something in her tone made Everett reassess the woman before him. There was more to her story, something that made returning to town more frightening than being chained to a tree in the wilderness. Before he could question her further, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Catherine's eyes widened in terror. "They're coming back," she whispered. "Hide," Everett hissed, pulling Catherine behind the massive oak. 3 riders appeared at the edge of the clearing, their horses snorting clouds of steam in the cool air. The lead rider, a tall man with a thick mustache and expensive boots, dismounted first. Everett recognized the type immediately, rich, used to getting his way, dangerous when crossed. The others hung back, rifles resting across their saddles. "Catherine," the man bellowed, approaching the tree where chains now hung empty. "Catherine, you get back here." Catherine trembled against Everett, her fingers digging into his arm. "Thomas," she whispered, "and his brothers." Everett's hand moved to his gun. 3 against 1 were bad odds, but he'd faced worse. "She's gone," one of the mounted men called. "Tracks heading north." Thomas kicked the fallen chains, cursing. She couldn't have broken free herself. He scanned the tree-line, eyes narrowing. "Someone helped her." "We should head back, Thomas," the third man said. "The storm's coming in fast." Dark clouds had indeed gathered above, the promise of snow heavy in the air. Thomas spat on the ground, then stormed back to his horse. "She won't survive a night in these mountains anyway," he said, voice carrying to where Everett and Catherine hid. "Let the wolves have what's left of her." The men rode off, following a false trail Everett hadn't even realized Catherine had made while he'd been checking the perimeter. Smart woman. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Catherine sagged against the tree, her face ashen. "They really came back to make sure I was dead," she whispered. "Who are they?" Everett asked, helping her stand. "Thomas Holloway and his brothers, James and William." Catherine hugged herself, shivering in her thin dress. "The richest family in prosperity. They own everything, the silver mine, the bank, half the businesses." Everett shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "And one of them was going to marry you?" "Thomas." Catherine's voice hardened. "I was the schoolteacher, new in town. He courted me for 6 months. Yesterday was our wedding day." Her eyes dropped to the ground. "Until he found out I couldn't give him children." "How'd he find that out?" Everett asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Never mind. Not my business." "No, it's all right." Catherine pulled the coat tighter. "I got scarlet fever as a girl. The doctor told my parents I wouldn't be able to have babies. I told Thomas before the ceremony. I thought," her voice caught, "I thought he loved me enough that it wouldn't matter." Thunder rumbled overhead. Fat raindrops began to splatter on the leaves around them. "We need shelter," Everett said. "Can you ride?" Catherine nodded, though uncertainty flickered across her face. Everett led her back to Thunder, who nickered softly as they approached. He helped Catherine mount, then swung up behind her. "Hold on," he instructed, wrapping an arm around her waist to keep her steady. They rode north as the storm broke overhead, rain slashing through the trees. Catherine leaned against Everett's chest, her body shaking with cold despite his coat. The wedding dress, now soaked, clung to her legs like a shroud. An hour later, they reached a small cave set into a hillside. Everett had discovered it 2 days earlier. A perfect hiding spot with a narrow entrance that widened into a dry chamber big enough for a man and his horse. He helped Catherine dismount, her legs buckling as her feet touched the ground. Without a word, he scooped her into his arms and carried her inside, setting her gently on a bed of pine boughs he'd arranged as a sleeping area. "You never told me your name," Catherine said, watching as he built a small fire at the mouth of the cave where the smoke could escape. Everett hesitated, then shrugged. She'd likely seen his wanted poster anyway. Everett Blackwood. Recognition flashed in her eyes. The Billings bank robbery. He nodded, avoiding her gaze as he coaxed the fire to life. "I didn't kill that guard. That was my cousin's doing. But I was there, so you ran," Catherine finished for him. $5,000 on my head makes a man cautious about the company he keeps." Everett pulled jerky and dried apples from his saddlebag, offering them to her. "You should eat." Catherine accepted the food gratefully. "You could have left me," she said between bites. "Most men would have." "I'm not most men." Everett settled across from her, the fire between them. "Besides, I know something about being hunted." Outside, the storm raged, rain turning to sleet that rattled against the stone. Inside, warmth slowly returned to Catherine's cheeks. When she finished eating, Everett handed her his spare shirt and trousers. "They'll be too big, but they're dry." Catherine accepted the clothes with a nod of thanks. Everett turned his back, giving her privacy to change out of the sodden wedding dress. When he turned back, she sat cross-legged by the fire, drowning in his clothes but looking more comfortable. The white dress lay in a heap behind her, mud-stained and torn, a symbol of broken promises. "What will you do now?" Everett asked. Catherine poked at the fire with a stick. "I can't go back to prosperity. Thomas would kill me for the shame I've brought him." She looked up, her eyes reflecting the flames. "What about you? Where are you heading?" "Canada, maybe. Or California." Everett stretched his legs toward the fire. "Somewhere I can start fresh." "Must be nice," Catherine said softly. "Starting over." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the storm outside. Thunder rolled overhead, and Catherine flinched. "Never liked storms," she explained, embarrassed. "My mother used to say thunder was just the angels moving furniture," Everett said, surprising himself with the childhood memory. Catherine smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, revealing dimples in her cheeks. "My father said it was God playing 9 pins, she countered. "He loved to bowl." "Where is your family now?" Everett asked. The smile faded. "Gone. Pa died in the war. Ma lasted until I was 19. Then pneumonia took her. It's just me now." Another crack of thunder shook the cave, closer this time. Catherine jumped, then tried to hide it by reaching for her discarded wedding dress. From its pocket, she pulled a small leather-bound book. "What's that?" Everett asked. Catherine's fingers tightened around the book. "Thomas's private ledger. I took it before the wedding. I was going to surprise him by organizing his accounts." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Now it's the only thing I have to bargain with." "Bargain?" "There are things in here," Catherine tapped the book, "that Thomas wouldn't want the territorial governor to see. Bribes to officials, tax fraud, money missing from the mine payroll." Everett raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous knowledge." "Dangerous man," Catherine countered. "But now I have leverage." The storm outside intensified, wind howling around the cave entrance. Catherine shivered despite the fire's warmth. Everett moved closer, offering his blanket as additional covering. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll figure out our next move in the morning." Catherine wrapped the blanket around herself, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, voice heavy with approaching sleep. Everett stared into the fire, considering his answer. "Let's just say I know what it's like when people decide your worth before knowing your story." Catherine's eyes drifted closed, but her hand reached out, finding his. "Thank you," she murmured. As she slept, Everett kept watch, one eye on the cave entrance, one hand near his revolver. Outside, the world was chaos, wind and rain and danger. Inside this small cave, for the first time in months, he felt something like peace. And that worried him more than any storm. Blood dripped from the rabbit snare onto fresh snow as Everett showed Catherine how to skin their dinner. She flinched at first, then steadied her hands on the knife. A woman in a torn wedding dress learning to survive. This wasn't how either of them had planned to spend that cold December week. "You're a fast learner," Everett said, watching her fingers work the blade with growing confidence. Catherine's laugh came out short and surprised. "My father wanted sons. He got me instead. So he taught me everything anyway." She paused, studying the rabbit. "Thomas hated that I knew more about ledgers than lace." The hidden camp nestled between river and mountain had become their temporary home. Pine branches formed a shelter beside a small cave, keeping the worst of the wind at bay. Inside, Catherine had created surprising comfort from nothing. Woven pine needle bedding, stones arranged to reflect the fire's heat. "Never seen anyone heal so quick," Everett remarked, nodding toward her wrists. The raw wounds from the shackles had already formed new pink skin. "Spite is a powerful medicine," she replied, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. The mountain sunset painted the snow orange and purple as they sat beside the small fire. 3 days of hiding had formed a strange routine between them. They worked together without speaking now, understanding the rhythm of survival. Catherine added herbs she'd found to the cooking pot while Everett cleaned his weapons. "That smells better than anything I've eaten in months," he admitted. "Wintergreen and sage. My grandmother's trick for tough meat." Catherine stirred the pot, then looked up sharply. "Why did you really stop for me, Mr. Blackwood? Most men would have kept riding." Everett's hands stilled on his gun. "I know what it feels like to be judged before you've done anything wrong." The fire popped, sending sparks dancing into the darkening sky. Catherine pulled out a small leather-bound book from her torn wedding dress pocket. "I kept Thomas's private ledger. Every bribe, every stolen claim, every worker cheated of wages." Her voice dropped lower. "Even the money he paid Marshall Hines to look the other way when miners died in that cave-in last spring." Everett whistled low. "That's why he chained you up. You knew too much. He caught me copying figures the night before our wedding. Said no wife of his would question his business." Catherine's fingers traced the book's worn cover. "He wanted to kill me, but his brother convinced him this would be worse. Leaving me to die slowly, disgraced, where no one would find me." The look that passed between them held something new. Not just shared danger, but shared purpose. "We could use that book," Everett said slowly. "The circuit judge comes through these parts every few months. With evidence like that." Catherine's eyes widened. "You'd help me bring him down? Even with bounty hunters after you?" "Maybe it's time I stopped running." They ate in thoughtful silence, possibilities unfolding between them like a map to a new future. The rabbit stew warmed their bellies as Catherine told Everett about prosperity. The mining town's layout, who might help them, who couldn't be trusted. Night fell fully around their camp. Stars appeared in the gaps between pine branches, bright points in the darkness. Catherine unwrapped a small bundle from her pocket. 3 sugar cubes, somehow preserved through her ordeal. "Saved these from the wedding prep," she explained, offering one to Everett. "Seems like a good time for something sweet." The sugar melted on Everett's tongue, a sharp contrast to the harsh life he'd been living. Something tight in his chest loosened slightly. "Tell me about being an outlaw?" Catherine asked, her face softened by firelight. "Is it like the dime novels say?" Everett snorted. "Nothing glamorous about sleeping in the dirt and looking over your shoulder every minute." He hesitated, then added, "I didn't start out aiming to be wanted. First time was just trying to feed my sister after our farm failed. And where is she now? Married to a shopkeeper in Oregon. She thinks I'm dead. Safer that way. Catherine reached across the fire and touched his hand, her fingers warm against his. Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Blackwood. The moment hung between them, fragile as a spider's web glinting with dew. Then Everett's horse gave a sharp whinny from where it was tied. Both of them froze. Everett moved first, dumping snow on the fire in one swift motion. The hiss of steam and sudden darkness made Catherine gasp. He grabbed her arm, pulling her into the shadows of the pines. "Don't move," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Through the trees came the yellow glow of lanterns. Men's voices carried in the cold air, along with the distinctive baying of tracking hounds. "They've found us," Catherine breathed, clutching the ledger to her chest. Everett's face was grim in the faint moonlight filtering through the branches. "Not Holloways, bounty hunters. And they're getting closer." Blood smeared across floorboards as Catherine dragged Everett into the abandoned trapper's cabin. The bullet had only grazed his shoulder, but the wound bled freely, leaving a trail in the mud outside. Thunder cracked overhead, rain pouring down so hard it might wash away their tracks. If luck was on their side. "Hold still," Catherine ordered, tearing strips from her already tattered wedding dress. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed cloth against the wound. Everett gritted his teeth, face gone pale beneath his tan. "How'd you know about this place?" "Thomas used to meet his lady friends here." Catherine's mouth twisted as she threaded a needle by lantern light. "I followed him once. He never knew." The cabin smelled of mold and old tobacco, but its sturdy walls kept out the storm that howled around them like a living creature. Rain lashed the single dirty window as Catherine heated the needle in the flame. "This will hurt," she warned, positioning the needle above his torn flesh. Everett managed a weak laugh. "Can't be worse than the time I got bit by a rattler in Arizona territory." The needle pierced skin. Catherine worked with quick, neat stitches, surprising herself with her steady hands. Outside, lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the barren cabin interior. A broken chair, a rusted stove, a small table missing one leg. "Why'd you shoot at them?" she asked as she tied off the thread. "We could have hidden. Those weren't ordinary bounty hunters." Everett winced as she dabbed whiskey on the wound. "I recognized Jenkins by his eye patch. He doesn't take men alive. Too much hassle for less money." Catherine shivered, remembering the men's hard faces in the lantern light before they fled. "Will they follow us here?" "Not till the storm passes." Everett tested his shoulder, grimacing. "We've got a few hours at most." Catherine built a small fire in the stove, careful to keep it low so smoke wouldn't give away their position. The meager warmth spread slowly through the cabin as they huddled close. Their clothes steamed gently, drying from the soaking they'd received during their escape. "You should try to sleep," Catherine said, noticing how Everett's eyes kept dropping despite his efforts to stay alert. "Can't. Not safe." But even as he said it, exhaustion and blood loss pulled him toward unconsciousness. "I'll keep watch," she promised, taking his revolver from its holster. The weight of it surprised her, but she held it firmly. "I know how to use this. My father taught me to shoot varmints off our garden." A ghost of a smile touched Everett's lips before he finally surrendered to sleep. Catherine sat by the window, watching rain stream down the glass while Everett's breathing settled into a steady rhythm. The revolver lay heavy in her lap. Outside, the storm slowly spent its fury, thunder growing more distant. By dawn, only a light drizzle remained. The first rays of sunlight found Catherine still awake, her back straight against the wall. Sometime during the night, she'd made her decision. She knew what they needed to do. Everett stirred with the light, immediately alert despite his injury. "You should have woken me," he said, checking his shoulder. The bandage showed only a small spot of fresh blood. "You needed rest to heal." Catherine had used the quiet hours to think, to plan. "We need to talk about what happens next." Sunlight revealed the cabin more clearly, mouse droppings in corners, A cracked mirror on the wall, faded curtains that might once have been blue. It wasn't much, but it had kept them alive. Everett pushed himself upright, jaw tight against the pain. I know a place. Trading post 2 days north. Man who runs it owes me. He can get you passage to Helena. And you? I'll head south. Draw them away. Catherine watched a determined sparrow build its nest under the cabin's small porch overhang, carrying twigs twice its size without giving up. That's a terrible plan. Everett blinked in surprise. We split up, we both lose. Catherine stood, moving to where her torn wedding dress hung drying. From its hidden pocket, she pulled the leather ledger. This is worth more than either of us alone. Sunlight caught the dust motes dancing between them as she laid out her plan. They wouldn't run, they would return to prosperity. They would face Thomas Holloway and his corrupt town on their own terms, with evidence that could destroy him. The circuit judge arrives in 3 days, she explained, opening the ledger to show columns of figures, dates, names. This shows everything. Miners paid half their promised wages, claims stolen through forged papers, bribes to the marshal to ignore safety violations. Everett studied the neat handwriting, the careful accounting of corruption. This is the kind of thing that gets people killed, Catherine. I'm already dead to that town, she replied. Thomas made sure of that. A blue jay landed on the broken porch railing, its bright colors stark against the weathered wood. They watched it through the window, this flash of life and beauty in a forgotten place. Why would you want me along? Everett finally asked. I'm just added risk. Another wanted man. Catherine's fingers brushed the healing wounds on her wrists, the marks of chains that had nearly killed her. In that ledger, there's an entry from last March. $500 paid to Marshall Hines to pin the Billings bank robbery on suitable drifter. Everett went very still. That was my first big job. The thing that put my name on wanted posters. Except you didn't do it, Catherine said softly. Thomas's younger brother James robbed that bank to cover gambling debts. You were just convenient. The truth hung between them, heavy as thunder. Everett's hands curled into fists, then slowly relaxed. So, Catherine continued, we both have reason to want justice. Together, we might actually get it. Everett stood, testing his injured shoulder. Pain showed in the tightness around his eyes, but determination showed stronger. He crossed to the broken table and pulled out the map tucked in his saddlebag. Together they bent over it, plotting their return to prosperity. Two fugitives, planning to walk straight back into the lion's den. It's not just about the ledger, Everett said suddenly. If we're doing this, we need allies. People in town who'll stand with you. Catherine thought of the quiet strength of Widow Chen, who had lost her husband in a mine collapse Thomas had covered up. Of young Sarah at the telegraph office, whose brother had been run out of town for questioning the mine's safety. Of old Doc Wilson, who had treated too many broken miners to believe the Holloway's lies. We won't be alone, she promised. Their fingers met on the map at the spot marking prosperity. The touch lingered, neither pulling away. Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. Why risk everything for me? Everett asked quietly. I'm just an outlaw you met 4 days ago. Catherine's answer came without hesitation, simple and true as sunrise. Because you saw me as a person when they tried to make me nothing. Blood froze in Everett's veins as the church bell rang 6 times, announcing their presence to anyone with ears in prosperity. The mining town sat nestled in the valley below them, smoke curling from chimneys like ghostly fingers against the purple dusk. Catherine gripped his arm, her nails digging through his shirt. Someone's watching us, she whispered, nodding toward a boy perched on a fence, mouth hanging open at the sight of them. Before Everett could react, the child vanished down an alley. The clock was ticking now. Keep your head down, Everett muttered, adjusting his hat to shadow his face. His fingers twitched for his gun, but it lay hidden in Catherine's satchel, a necessary risk for their dangerous plan. They rode double on his tired horse, Catherine wearing simple clothes borrowed from a kind farmer's wife they'd met yesterday. Main Street stretched before them like the belly of a sleeping snake. On either side stood the bones of prosperity. The general store, the saloon, the bank, all owned by Thomas Holloway's family. Men in dusty work clothes stumbled from the mine at the end of their shift, faces black with coal dust, shoulders bent with exhaustion. A woman hurried past with a basket of laundry, freezing mid-step when she spotted Catherine. "Mary Winters," Catherine whispered, turning her face away. "She works for Thomas's mother." The woman dropped her basket, dirty clothes spilling onto the muddy street, as she ran toward the large house on the hill. "We've got an hour, maybe less," Everett calculated, spurring the horse faster. They took a narrow path behind the row of buildings, avoiding the curious stares of townspeople. Music spilled from the saloon, a piano playing a wobbly version of Buffalo Gals, covering the sound of their approach to a modest boarding house tucked behind a stand of aspen trees. "Widow Chun lives here," Catherine explained, sliding from the horse with a wince. The marks on her wrists still showed angry red beneath her sleeves. Her husband died in the mine collapse last year. Thomas refused to pay what he owed her, claimed it was Chinese carelessness that caused the accident. The soft glow of lamplight beckoned from a back window. Catherine rapped her knuckles against it in a pattern: 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more. The curtain twitched, revealing the worried face of a middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair. "Holy Mother of—" Mrs. Chen gasped, quickly unlatching the window. "Inside now. Both of you." They scrambled through, Everett helping Catherine before following. The small kitchen smelled of ginger and garlic, a pot of soup simmering on the cast-iron stove. Mrs. Chun bolted the window and pulled the curtains tight before turning to stare at Catherine. "The whole town thinks you stole silver spoons and ran away," she said, her accent thickening with emotion. "Thomas has been drinking for days, breaking things, threatening anyone who mentions your name." Catherine's smile held no humor. "And yet here I am, back from the dead with proof of his crimes." She patted the satchel where the ledger hid among their few belongings. Mrs. Chun crossed herself, though Everett noticed the small Buddha statue on her shelf. "You bring storm to calm waters. Why come back at all?" Catherine glanced at Everett, something unspoken passing between them. "Because sometimes the only way forward is through fire." The widow sighed, resigned. "You need food, rest. I have room upstairs where mine workers sometimes stay. No one will look there." As they followed her up a narrow staircase, Everett felt the weight of eyes from every window in town. News would spread faster than wildfire. The rejected bride had returned, and she wasn't alone. The room under the eaves was small but clean, with 2 narrow cots and a washstand. Mrs. Chun brought them bowls of fragrant soup and fresh bread before leaving them to rest, promising to wake them if trouble came. Catherine spread the ledger on the bed between them, its pages filled with Thomas's neat handwriting. "Every bribe, every cheated miner, every shipment of faulty equipment," she explained, pointing to entries that made Everett's jaw tighten. "He even paid off the former marshal to look the other way when 3 men died in the North Shaft." "And the new marshal?" Everett asked, dipping bread into his soup. Catherine's face darkened. "Thomas's cousin. Just as corrupt, twice as mean." They spent hours refining their plan in whispers. The circuit judge would arrive in 2 days for the monthly court session. Catherine would approach him with the ledger and her testimony, while Everett remained hidden, ready to step in if needed. "And after?" Everett asked, the question hanging between them like smoke. Catherine looked down at her hands, still bearing the marks of her chains. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." "Liar," he said softly, no heat in the word. A small smile touched her lips. "Perhaps we both deserve fresh starts." Sleep came in fitful bursts, Everett jerking awake at every creak of the old house. Past midnight, he stood at the window, watching the empty street. Catherine's breathing had finally evened into the rhythm of deep slumber. In sleep, the worry lines between her brows relaxed, making her look younger. He wondered what dreams visited her. Nightmares of chains, or hopes of freedom? A flicker of torchlight on the street below snapped him to alertness. 3 men approached the boarding house, moving with the confidence of those who feared no law. Everett recognized Thomas Holloway from Catherine's descriptions. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a shock of red hair visible even in the dim light. His brothers flanked him like matching bookends, each carrying a rifle. Everett moved to wake Catherine just as the first heavy knock rattled the front door. She sat up instantly, eyes wide with fear that quickly hardened into determination. "He's found us," she whispered, reaching for the ledger. The pounding grew louder, accompanied by Thomas's voice, slurred with whiskey and rage. "I know she's in there, Chun. A boy saw them ride in. Open this door before I break it down." Mrs. Chen's voice drifted up the stairs, trying to calm the angry men. Everett searched the room for anything that might serve as a weapon, cursing himself for agreeing to hide his gun. Catherine gripped his hands, her forehead pressing against his. "Whatever happens, we stick to the plan. The judge is our only chance." The splintering crash of the front door giving way echoed through the house. Heavy boots stomped across the floor below. Mrs. Chun screamed once, then fell silent. Catherine's eyes held Everett's, steady despite her fear. "Promise me you won't get yourself killed." Before he could answer, the stairs creaked under the weight of approaching footsteps. Pain exploded behind Everett's eyes as consciousness returned. Iron bars swam into focus, then the dirt floor beneath him. Every breath sent daggers through his chest where Thomas's boots had cracked at least 2 ribs. The Prosperity jail cell stank of sour whiskey, old sweat, and the copper tang of his own blood. "Finally awake, are you?" Everett squinted at the marshal, Thomas's cousin Billy, who lounged behind a desk with his feet propped up. The man picked his teeth with a knife, watching Everett like a cat observing a mouse. "Where's Catherine?" Everett's voice rasped from his dry throat. Billy's smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "Cousin Thomas took her home. Said they had wedding business to finish." Fury gave Everett strength to pull himself up, ignoring the stabbing pain in his side. His hand instinctively reached for a weapon that wasn't there. "Don't bother," Billy said, twirling Everett's revolver on one finger. "Nice piece. Might keep it after you're hanging from the oak tree tomorrow." Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the barred window. Distant sounds of the mine, pickaxes striking stone, men calling to each other, told Everett life in Prosperity continued despite the drama unfolding. "Circuit judge arrives tomorrow morning," Billy continued, enjoying his captive audience. "Not that it'll matter for you, Blackwood. Your reward poster says dead or alive, and dead's a sight less paperwork." Everett's mind raced, calculating options. Catherine's screams still echoed in his memory from when Thomas's brothers dragged her from Mrs. Chen's house. The widow had fought bravely, earning a bloody nose for her trouble. A sharp pain in his left boot reminded Everett of the small knife hidden in the sole, overlooked in the hasty search before they threw him in the cell. If he could reach it without Billy noticing. Voices outside caught their attention, angry shouts growing louder. A woman's voice rose above the others, familiar and defiant. "What in tarnation?" Billy muttered, moving to the window. Everett slumped against the wall, using the movement to slide his hand toward his boot. His fingers had just touched the hidden compartment when Billy whirled around, eyes wide. "Your lady friend's causing a ruckus," he said, grabbing his hat. "Got half the town gathered round her like she's preaching the gospel." Hope flared in Everett's chest. Catherine was alive and fighting back. "This ain't over, Outlaw," Billy warned, checking his gun before heading for the door. "Don't get comfortable." The moment the lock clicked, Everett pried the knife free and attacked the cell's rusty lock. Years of opening things that didn't belong to him guided his hands. Each scrape of metal seemed loud enough to wake the dead, but the noise outside grew louder, covering his work. The lock finally yielded with a reluctant groan. Everett pushed the cell door open, half expecting to meet Billy's gun. Instead, he found Mrs. Chun standing in the doorway, her left eye swollen shut but a triumphant smile on her face. "Took you long enough," she said, thrusting his gun belt into his hands. "Catherine's buying time, but Thomas has been drinking since yesterday. He's dangerous." Everett buckled the belt with shaking hands. "How bad is she hurt?" Mrs. Chen's good eye hardened. Bad enough to make half the women in town stand with her. Thomas thinks he owns everything that breathes in prosperity. Today he learns different. They slipped out the back, Everett biting back groans as each step jarred his injured ribs. The town's single street had become a stage for confrontation. Nearly every resident gathered in a circle around the drama unfolding before the general store. Catherine stood on the store's wooden steps, her dress torn and dirty but her spine straight as a poker. Purple bruises marked her face and throat, yet her voice rang clear as she held up a familiar leather book. $7 paid to silence Widow Parker when her husband died from bad air in the South Tunnel. She read, her finger tracing the neat writing. $15 to Marshall Sanders to report the death as natural causes. Thomas Holloway loomed before her, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. His brothers flanked him, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and anger. The crowd murmured, minors exchanging knowing glances as Catherine continued reading Thomas's secret accounts. $20 to the county clerk to falsify safety reports, she called out, her voice carrying to every corner of the gathering. 30 pieces of silver to Judge Wilson to rule against the miners' families seeking compensation. Enough, Thomas bellowed, his hand shooting out to grab the ledger. You lying witch. Making up stories won't save you from what's coming. Catherine stepped back, clutching the book to her chest. Every word is true and you know it. Your handwriting, your accounts, your shame laid bare for all to see. The crowd shifted uneasily. Miners removed their caps. Women clutched each other's hands. Years of suspicion crystallized into certainty as Catherine's words confirmed what many had long suspected. Mrs. Chun nudged Everett forward. Now's your moment. She can't hold him off much longer. Everett pushed through the crowd, ignoring the gasps of recognition. The pain in his side faded against the more urgent need to reach Catherine before Thomas's control snapped completely. You've bewitched these fools with your pretty lies, Thomas spat, reaching for Catherine again. But I know what you really are. Damaged goods not fit to bear my name or my children. His hand connected with her cheek, the slap echoing like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Catherine staggered but didn't fall, blood beating at the corner of her mouth. You lying whore? Thomas growled, lunging for the book again. The crowd gasped as Everett stepped between them. His revolver aimed steady at Thomas's chest despite the pain radiating through his body. That's not how a gentleman addresses a lady, Everett said, his quiet voice carrying across the now silent gathering. Thomas froze, recognition and hatred flashing across his face. The outlaw should have killed you when I had the chance. Many have tried. Everett kept his gun trained on Thomas, aware of the man's brothers inching toward their weapons. Back away from Miss Mills. Billy pushed through the crowd, his own gun drawn. Drop it, Blackwood. You're under arrest. For one breathless moment, the future balanced on a knife's edge. For guns, dozens of witnesses, and only one path forward. Everett met Catherine's eyes, seeing in them not fear but absolute trust. Thomas Holloway, unaccustomed to being challenged, made his final mistake. His hand dropped to his pistol, a snarl twisting his handsome features. The shot cracked through the mountain air, startling birds from the nearby trees. The shot split the air like thunder, freezing everyone in place. Thomas's scream broke the silence as he dropped to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The crowd backed away, mothers pulling children behind their skirts. Everett kept his gun steady, smoke still curling from the barrel. His message was clear to everyone watching. This ends now. You shot me, Thomas howled, his face twisted with pain and disbelief. You'll hang for this. Better men than you have promised me that, Everett replied, his voice calm despite the racing of his heart. A circle had formed around them, with Thomas's brothers standing uncertain, hands hovering near their own weapons. Catherine stepped forward, the leather book clutched tight against her chest. Nobody else needs to get hurt today. Thomas, tell your brothers to back down. For a moment, Everett thought Thomas would refuse. The man's eyes darted wildly between Catherine, the crowd, and the blood soaking his expensive shirt. Finally, He nodded to his brothers, who slowly raised their hands. "Somebody fetch the doctor," Mrs. Chun called from the edge of the crowd. "And send word to Sheriff Miller in Pine Creek. Our marshal won't do what's right." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Thomas was taken to the doctor's house, his brothers locked in the jail under watch by miners who volunteered to ensure they stayed put. Everett found himself in the strange position of being both prisoner and protector. His gun returned to its holster, but his freedom still uncertain. As night fell, lanterns were lit in the town hall where Catherine had convinced the town council to gather. Nearly every adult in Prosperity crowded into the room, their faces a mixture of fear, anger, and hope. "We've lived under the Holloway's thumb for too long," said Mr. Jenkins, the blacksmith whose daughter had lost a husband in a mining accident the previous winter. "They've made us afraid to speak the truth." Catherine stood at the front of the room, her bruised face visible to all. "I was punished for not being what Thomas wanted. How many of you have suffered because you couldn't be what the Holloways demanded?" Hands rose throughout the room. Stories poured out like water through a broken dam. Stories of lost land, of wages docked without reason, of accidents that were no accidents at all. "The circuit judge arrives tomorrow," Catherine reminded them. "Every one of you who speaks adds weight to our case." A heavy knock at the door silenced the room. Sheriff Miller from Pine Creek entered, his weathered face unreadable as he surveyed the crowd. His eyes came to rest on Everett, who straightened his shoulders, prepared for the worst. "Mr. Blackwood," the sheriff said with a nod. "Been a while since that business in Helena." Everett swallowed hard. "Sheriff." To everyone's surprise, the lawman cracked a smile. "You still claiming you didn't steal those horses from Colonel Preston?" "Never did," Everett replied. "And never got the chance to prove it." The sheriff scratched his chin. "Funny thing. Got a telegram last month saying Preston's former ranch hand confessed to selling those horses and blaming you. Never thought I'd see you to tell you that." A murmur ran through the crowd. Catherine moved to Everett's side, her hand finding his in the shadows between them. Morning brought sunlight streaming through windows still covered in the night's frost. The town stirred early, news of the judge's imminent arrival traveling from house to house. Prosperity hadn't seen such excitement since the silver vein was first struck 10 years earlier. By 9 o'clock, horses and wagons lined the main street. Families who lived too far to visit more than once a month had made the journey in after hearing that something big was happening at the courthouse. "Never seen so many folks in town," the baker commented as he handed out free rolls to children waiting with their parents. The courthouse, a simple two-story building that doubled as the town hall, had been swept and dusted for the occasion. Fresh flowers from Mrs. Chen's garden adorned the judge's bench. The room grew stuffy as people packed inside, everyone craning their necks to see as Judge Harmon entered, his black robes swirling around his boots. "Court's in session," called the clerk, and the room fell silent. The proceedings began with Thomas and his brothers, still under guard. The doctor had bandaged Thomas's shoulder, but he sat with the stiff posture of a man in considerable pain. His usual arrogance had dimmed, replaced with the cautious calculation of someone who sensed his power slipping away. Catherine was called first. She walked to the witness stand with her head high, the torn and dirty wedding dress she'd worn in the wilderness now replaced with a simple blue skirt and white blouse borrowed from Mrs. Chun. She looked like any other young woman in town, except for the steel in her spine and the unwavering clarity in her eyes. "Miss Mills," the judge began, "please tell the court what happened 3 days ago, starting with the wedding ceremony." Catherine's testimony silenced the room. She spoke plainly, without tears or dramatics, describing her discovery of her infertility, Thomas's rage, and the humiliation of being chained to a tree in her wedding dress and abandoned in the wilderness. "And this man," the judge gestured to Everett, "came to your aid?" "He did, Your Honor. Without Mr. Blackwood, I would have died there." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "And this ledger? How did it come into your possession?" Catherine explained her role as bookkeeper for the Holloway mining operation. "I knew what was happening was wrong, but I thought perhaps as Thomas's wife I might influence him toward fairness." When that hope died, I took the ledger as proof. Hours passed as witness after witness came forward. Miners spoke of unsafe conditions. Shopkeepers admitted to being forced to extend credit to the Holloways while denying it to others. And Mrs. Chun described how her late husband's rightful claim to land had been stolen through forged documents. By late afternoon, Judge Harmon's expression had grown increasingly grim. "I've heard enough," he declared, silencing the room. "Thomas Holloway, James Holloway, and Samuel Holloway, you stand accused of numerous crimes against the people of this county." The judge listed the charges: fraud, intimidation, assault, false imprisonment, and more. With each charge, Thomas's face grew paler. "Your Honor," Thomas's lawyer interrupted, "my clients are pillars of this community. Without them, the mine would close. The town would die." "Perhaps," the judge replied, "but justice must be served regardless of a man's position. The evidence is clear. I'm remanding all 3 Holloway brothers to custody pending formal trial in Helena." A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by murmurs that grew into a steady hum of conversation. The judge banged his gavel for silence. "Now, as to the matter of Mr. Blackwood." Everett stood, his hat in his hands. This was the moment he had been dreading since agreeing to return to town with Catherine. Despite Sheriff Miller's news about the horse theft, there were other charges, other posters with his face. "Your Honor," he began, "I won't deny I've been on the wrong side of the law." "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, not unkindly. "I haven't asked for your confession yet." Catherine rose from her seat. "Your Honor, if I may speak on Mr. Blackwood's behalf?" The judge nodded, and Catherine moved to stand beside Everett. "This man saved my life when he had every reason to ride away. He risked his freedom to help me seek justice. And we've learned that at least one of the charges against him was false. But not all," the judge noted. "No," Catherine agreed, "but I believe in second chances, Your Honor. With the Holloways removed, this town needs leadership, someone who understands both hard work and compassion." The judge's eyebrows rose. "Are you suggesting Mr. Blackwood assume control of the mine?" "Under the court's supervision," Catherine clarified, "for a probationary period. Let his future actions balance his past mistakes." A silence fell over the courtroom as the judge considered the unusual proposal. Everett stared at Catherine in disbelief, stunned by her faith in him. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "If it helps, Your Honor, I'd be willing to vouch for Blackwood. He's got a quick temper but a good heart. And he knows mining. Worked 3 years in the Black Hills before his troubles started." Judge Harmon tapped his fingers on the bench, deep in thought. Finally, he looked directly at Everett. "Do you accept these terms, Mr. Blackwood? 6 months managing the mine, fair wages for all workers, regular reports to the court, and no leaving the county without permission." Everett felt as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff. Behind him lay his old life, lonely, dangerous, always looking over his shoulder. Ahead was something unknown but filled with possibility. He glanced at Catherine, who gave him the smallest of nods. "I accept, Your Honor." The judge's gavel fell with a crack that seemed to break something open in the room. People surged forward, some to shake Everett's hand, others to thank Catherine. Still others simply caught up in the tide of change sweeping through their town. As the crowd dispersed, Everett found Catherine standing by the courthouse window, watching the setting sun turn the mountains to gold. Words failed him as he tried to express his gratitude. Catherine turned to him with a gentle smile. "You gave me back my freedom, Everett. I thought it only fair to offer you the same." In that moment, with the last light of day painting Catherine's face in soft gold, Everett realized that the chains that had bound him weren't just the wanted posters or the fear of capture. They were his belief that he could never be more than what others had decided he was. Looking into Catherine's eyes, he saw himself reflected not as an outlaw, but as a man worthy of trust, of purpose, of a second chance. For the first time in years, Everett Blackwood felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders, replaced by the unfamiliar but welcome burden of hope. The first snow fell early that year, dusting prosperity with white powder that crunched under boots and turned breath to silver clouds. Miners hurried past the schoolhouse, calling greetings to the children playing in the yard during their lunch break. Inside, Catherine Mills stood at the blackboard, chalk dust powdering her sleeves as she explained fractions to the older students. "Miss Mills, someone's coming," little Emma Jenkins called from her desk by the window. The girl's excitement made the other children rush to look, pressing noses against the cold glass. Catherine's heart quickened as she spotted the familiar silhouette on horseback. "Back to your seats, everyone. We still have division to master before the bell." The children groaned but obeyed, though their attention remained divided between their slates and occasional glances toward the window. Catherine understood their distraction. In the 4 months since the Holloway's trial and removal from power, Everett Blackwood had become something of a local legend. When the school day ended and the children scattered homeward through the snow, Catherine found Everett waiting, holding the reins of his horse and a second mount, a pretty chestnut mare she hadn't seen before. "Thought you might join me for a ride," he said by way of greeting, his hat already in his hands despite the cold. "Got something to show you at the mine." Catherine hesitated, glancing at the stack of papers she'd planned to grade that evening. Everett's eyes held a spark of excitement she rarely saw, like a boy with a secret too wonderful to keep. "Let me get my coat," she decided, disappearing inside. They rode in comfortable silence, their horses' hooves leaving paired tracks in the fresh snow. The mountain air bit at Catherine's cheeks, painting them pink, but she didn't mind. These past months had taught her to appreciate sensations that reminded her she was alive, free, and making her own choices. "The men have been working extra shifts," Everett explained as they approached the mine entrance. "Wanted to finish before the ground freezes solid." Catherine followed his gaze to a new structure beside the main shaft, a squat, solid building with a metal roof and freshly painted sign reading Safety Office. "The cave-in last month scared everyone," she said softly, remembering the night they'd all held vigil while rescue efforts continued. All 5 trapped miners had been saved, but it had been too close. Everett nodded grimly. "Won't happen again. Not on my watch." He dismounted, then helped Catherine from her horse. "But that's not what I brought you to see." Inside the mining office, warmth from the potbelly stove greeted them. Maps and papers covered the walls, work schedules, safety protocols, production reports. Through a side door, Catherine glimpsed the new infirmary, stocked with medical supplies Everett had ordered from as far away as Denver. "Look here," he said, unrolling a large document across his desk. "Came on yesterday's stage from Helena." Catherine leaned closer, scanning the official-looking paper with its red seal. "The governor's office?" "Everett, what?" She stopped, her finger tracing a name in the flowing script. "Catherine Mills Educational Fund?" Everett's face flushed above his beard, though whether from the warmth or something else, Catherine couldn't tell. 10% of the mine's profits, set aside for schooling. Enough to build a proper schoolhouse by spring, with quarters for a teacher upstairs. And scholarships for children who want more learning than prosperity can provide. Tears pricked at Catherine's eyes. "This is... Everett, how did you arrange this?" Judge Harmon helped with the legal parts. Said he'd never seen a mining town put education before saloons. His rough fingers brushed a stray hair from her cheek. "Wasn't hard to convince the investors. Turns out treating workers fair makes the mine more profitable, not less." Catherine studied his face, seeing beyond the weathered skin and beard to the man who had emerged these past months. Still rough-edged and quick to anger at injustice, but steadfast and increasingly rooted in the community he'd once only passed through. "My probation hearing is next week," he said more quietly, turning to stoke the fire. "Judge will decide if I've earned my second chance." "You've more than earned it," Catherine said firmly. Everyone in town would say the same. When Everett turned back to her, his expression had changed to something more vulnerable. "And if the judge agrees? What then?" Catherine understood the real question beneath his words. "Then you'd be free to go, if that's what you want." The silence between them grew thick with unspoken feelings. From outside came the changing of shifts, men calling to one another as day workers headed home and night workers arrived to continue digging silver from the mountain's heart. "I've been free to go for weeks now," Everett finally admitted. Sheriff Miller sent word last month that the last warrant was cleared. Some witness came forward about the Denver stage robbery, said the man they saw wasn't me at all. Surprise and hurt flashed across Catherine's face. "You didn't tell me." Wasn't sure what to say. Everett moved to the window, watching snowflakes swirl in the lantern light outside. Never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots. Never had reason to. "And now?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering directly, Everett crossed to a cabinet and withdrew a wooden box. "Been working on this in the evenings." Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay an intricately carved chess set. Catherine lifted a piece. A queen, her tiny face bearing a striking resemblance to Catherine herself. "Each one took hours," Everett explained, almost shy now. "Helps me think. About the future. About what I want." Catherine examined the other pieces. The king had Everett's features. The knights resembled Sheriff Miller. The rooks were miniature versions of the mining shaft towers. And the pawns, each unique, represented the townspeople of prosperity. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "A whole world in miniature." "A home," Everett corrected gently. "Something worth defending." Their eyes met over the carved figures, and Catherine felt something within her shift and settle, like the last piece of a puzzle finding its place. This man who had once been a stranger, who had cut her free from chains both physical and invisible, was offering something neither of them had dared hope for, a shared future. "I got a letter," she said suddenly, setting down the chess piece. "From St. Louis University. They're seeking someone to establish a women's school of mathematics." Everett's face fell, though he tried to hide it. "Quite an honor." "It is," Catherine agreed. "I wrote back yesterday. When do you leave?" His voice was carefully neutral. "I don't." She moved closer to him, close enough to see the confusion in his eyes. "I told them I've already started important educational work here. That prosperity needs me." Understanding dawned slowly on Everett's face. "Catherine, I'd never ask you to give up an opportunity like that. Not for..." "For what?" she challenged gently. "For a small mountain town? For work that matters? For..." She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "For someone I've come to care for deeply." Outside, the mine whistle blew, signaling the end of a shift. Inside, time seemed suspended as Everett slowly raised a hand to Catherine's cheek. "When I found you chained to that tree," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I thought I was saving you. Never occurred to me you might be saving me right back." The first kiss they shared was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer both. When they separated, Catherine smiled up at him. "So you're staying too?" "Looks like. Got a mine to run. A town to help rebuild." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "A schoolteacher to court properly if she's willing." Christmas came to prosperity with a festive spirit the town hadn't seen in years. Everett, officially cleared of all charges and now the legitimate manager of the Silver Bell mine, had ordered glass ornaments all the way from New York for the massive pine tree erected in the town square. Children hung paper chains and popcorn strings, while adults gathered around bonfires, sharing mulled cider and stories. Catherine moved among the townspeople, no longer the rejected bride but Miss Mills the teacher, respected and welcomed. She caught Mrs. Chen's knowing smile as Everett approached, carrying 2 cups of steaming cider. "Speech!" someone called as Everett joined Catherine. Others took up the cry until Everett reluctantly climbed onto a wooden crate, pulling Catherine up beside him. "Not much for talking," he began awkwardly. "Rather let actions speak." "Then tell us about the new hospital wing," shouted a miner from the back. "And the railroad spur." Everett's face reddened above his beard. "Just good business. Healthy workers dig more silver. Railroad brings better prices for the ore." "And the lending library?" Mrs. Chun called with a mischievous grin. "Is that good business too?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Catherine squeezed Everett's hand. feeling his embarrassment at being the center of attention. "What my friend means to say," she interjected, saving him, "is that prosperity is becoming more than just a name for our town. It's becoming our reality, and it belongs to all of us." Cheers erupted, followed by the raising of cups and glasses. In the glow of lanterns and firelight, Catherine looked out at faces that had become familiar and dear. Mr. Jenkins and his daughter Emma, Sheriff Miller, who now visited monthly from Pine Creek, Mrs. Chun, whose boarding house had expanded to include a Chinese restaurant that drew visitors from 3 counties away. Later, as the celebration continued and snow began to fall again, Everett led Catherine away from the crowd toward the old oak tree at the edge of town. The same tree where Thomas had once left her chained. The path there no longer filled her with dread, but with a bittersweet recognition of how far she had come. "Wasn't sure if you'd want to come here," Everett admitted as they reached the massive trunk. "Could have picked somewhere else." Catherine shook her head, her breath clouding in the cold air. "No, this is right. This is where our story began." From his pocket, Everett withdrew a small carved figure, the oak tree he had shown her months earlier with its broken chains. Now, however, he had added to it. 2 tiny figures stood beside the tree, a man and a woman hand in hand. "Been thinking about worth," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. "How we measure it. How others try to measure it for us." Catherine nodded, thinking of Thomas's cruel dismissal when he learned she couldn't bear children, of how she had once believed her value lay in becoming someone's wife, someone's mother. "When I was on the run," Everett continued, "my worth was the price on those wanted posters. Nothing more. And now," Catherine prompted gently, "now I know better." He took both her hands in his. "A person's worth isn't in what they can give others. It's in who they choose to be, even when the choice is hard." From his other pocket, he produced a simple gold band, not a fancy engagement ring, but something more meaningful. Catherine recognized it instantly as the ring she had once carried from her father. The blacksmith's ring meant to remind her never to give her worth away again. "I had it sized smaller," Everett explained. "Added something inside." Catherine held it to the moonlight, reading the inscription, "Chosen, not chained." Tears spilled onto her cheeks as Everett knelt in the snow. "Catherine Mills, I'm not asking you to be mine. I'm asking if I can be yours. If we can choose each other, freely, as equals." Her answer came without hesitation, as natural as breathing. "Yes." As they walked back toward the celebration, arm in arm, Catherine looked up at the stars scattered across the Montana sky like silver dust on black velvet. 6 months ago, abandoned and chained, she had thought her life over. Instead, it had only been beginning. "Strange how things work out," she mused. "If Thomas hadn't rejected me, if I hadn't been running from the law," Everett added, "we might never have found each other." In the distance, the town of Prosperity glowed with warmth and light, a beacon in the wilderness. Children's laughter floated on the night air as snowflakes danced around them. "Sometimes," Everett said as they rejoined their friends and neighbors, "the worst day of your life turns out to be the first day of a better one." Catherine smiled up at him, this unlikely savior who had himself been saved. "And sometimes, being chained to a tree leads to the ultimate freedom." The story of the outlaw and the rejected bride would be told in Prosperity for generations to come. How 2 broken people found wholeness together, how chains became choices, how worth was discovered rather than assigned. But for Catherine and Everett, wrapped in the simple joy of having found each other, the best part of their story wasn't the dramatic rescue or the triumph over the Holloways. It was this, the quiet, daily choice to see the best in each other, to build something lasting from the ruins of what had been destroyed, and to recognize that sometimes, the heart's true home is found on the path we never planned to take.